Welcome to the channel. Today I bring you an emotional and transformative story, Aurora Fairchild's near-death experience. A journey that begins with a complicated birth and turns into a spiritual revelation that changes her life forever. Get ready for a narrative full of twists, deep messages and lessons about love and faith. Before we start, comment here which city you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the next inspiring stories. Let's go on this spiritual journey together. Hello, my name is Aurora Fairchild. I'm 35 years old and live in Savannah, Georgia with my husband Caleb and our 2 sons. I am an elementary school teacher at Riverside Elementary School, where I have taught for over a decade. I have always led a very ordinary life, dedicated to my family and my students. But one August morning 5 years ago, I had an experience that completely changed my perception of life and death. That morning, I woke up with a strange feeling. The air was thick and humid, typical of a Savannah summer. But there was something different. I was 39 weeks pregnant with my second child, and somehow, I knew this would be the day. Caleb, I called my husband who was still sleeping next to me. I think it's time. He opened his eyes, still drowsy. Are you sure, honey? It's not a false alarm like last week? I shook my head. No, this time it's different. I can feel it. Caleb jumped out of bed, suddenly alert. He started running around the room, grabbing the suitcase we had packed and making calls. I watched him, feeling a mixture of anxiety and excitement, but there was something more, a feeling he couldn't explain. When we arrived at Savannah Memorial Hospital, I went straight to the delivery room. Nurse Jenny, a middle-aged lady with a kind smile, helped me settle in. How are we feeling, Mrs. Fairchild? She asked, checking my vitals. Anxious, I answered honestly, and a little scared. Jenny gave my shoulder a comforting pat. It's normal to feel this way. But don't worry, we're here to take care of you and your baby. The following hours were a mixture of pain, expectation, and fear. The contractions became more and more intense, and I was squeezing Caleb's hand so hard I feared I was hurting him. You're doing great, Aurora, Caleb whispered in my ear. You are the strongest woman I know. Dr. Samuel Grayson, my obstetrician, entered the room. He had a serious look on his face that I didn't remember seeing before. How are we progressing? He asked the nurse. 8 centimeters dilated, doctor, Jenny replied. But the baby's heart rate is a little irregular. Dr. Grayson frowned, and my heart sped up. What does that mean? I asked, my voice shaking. It might be nothing, he tried to reassure me, but we will monitor closely. The next contractions were the most intense I have ever felt. It was like my body was being ripped in half. I screamed in pain, and Caleb held my hand even tighter. You can do it, love, he said. Breathe with me, in and out. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Dr. Grayson announced, It's time to push, Mrs. Fairchild. I gathered all my strength and pushed. Once, twice, 3 times. The 4th time, I heard Dr. Grayson say something that made my blood run cold. The cord is tangled. Everything was a blur after that. I vaguely remember more people entering the room, urgent voices barking orders. I pushed once more, with all the strength I had left, and then, silence. My baby was born, but he didn't cry. Why isn't he crying? I asked, panicked. What is happening? I saw them cut the umbilical cord, which was wrapped 3 times around my son's neck. His skin was blue. Before I could process what was happening, they took my baby away. Where are they taking him? I screamed. To the NICU, Dr. Grayson replied, his voice strained. He needs special care. I tried to get up, but a wave of dizziness hit me. I heard someone shout, She's going into hemorrhagic shock. The last thing I remember was seeing Caleb's desperate face and hearing the frantic sound of equipment around me. After that, everything went dark. Little did I know that this darkness would only be the beginning of the most extraordinary journey of my life. I can't say how long I was unconscious. It could have been seconds or hours. But when I woke up, I had a strange feeling, unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I opened my eyes and, to my surprise, I saw myself lying in the hospital bed. It was like watching a scene from a movie, except I was the protagonist. My body was pale and still, surrounded by doctors and nurses who were moving frantically. "We're losing her," I heard Dr. Grayson scream. "Prepare the defibrillator." I wanted to tell them that I was fine, that they didn't need to worry, but when I tried to speak, I realized I had no voice. Or rather, he had no mouth to speak. It was then that I understood. I was outside my body. At first, I was panicked. How was this possible? Was she dead? But slowly, a sense of calm began to wash over me. It was a peace I had never experienced before, as if the entire weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. I looked at Caleb, who was in the corner of the room, being comforted by a nurse. Tears streamed down his face. "Mr. Fairchild," the nurse said gently, "perhaps you should wait outside." "No," Caleb protested. "I won't leave you. Aurora, please stay with me." I wanted to hug him, tell him I was there, that I loved him, but he couldn't. All I could do was watch, floating above the scene. It was then that I noticed something even stranger. I could see everything with stunning clarity, every detail in the room, every expression on people's faces. It was as if my senses had been amplified 1,000 times. And the most surprising thing, I wasn't afraid. On the contrary, there was a sense of purpose, as if it was all part of a bigger plan that I still didn't fully understand. As I watched the scene below, I had a comforting thought about my children. Somehow, I knew they would be okay no matter what happened to me. It was a certainty that came from a place beyond reason. It was at that moment that I realized that I was not alone in that ethereal dimension. 2 luminous presences appeared next to me. I can't say that they were exactly angels as we imagined them, with wings and halos. They were more like forms of pure light that emanated a love so intense that it almost hurt to look at them. One of the presences approached me. He didn't speak in words, but somehow I could understand. "Aurora," the presence communicated, "do not be afraid. We are here to guide you." "Guide me where?" I asked, or rather, I thought. "Home," was the reply. I looked once again at my body, at Caleb, at the doctors who were still fighting to bring me back. I felt a pang of sadness, but at the same time, a deep acceptance. "I'm ready," I said to the presences of light. And so, guided by those heavenly beings, I began my journey beyond this world, a journey that would forever change my understanding of life, death, and everything in between. We left the hospital room, and suddenly I found myself entering a dark tunnel. But it wasn't a frightening or oppressive darkness. It was more like the night sky on a moonless night, full of possibilities and mysteries. "What is this place?" I asked the beings of light who guided me. One of them responded, not with words, but with a sense of understanding that blossomed in my mind. "This is the path between the worlds, Aurora, the passage between the physical and the spiritual." As we advanced, I noticed that the tunnel was made up of a series of flaming rings. Each ring glowed softly, emitting a light that did not hurt the eyes. It was comforting, like the glow of thousands of candles in an ancient cathedral. As we passed each ring, something incredible happened. I heard a musical note. It was as if the universe itself was singing to me. The notes blended into a soft, harmonious melody that seemed to lull my soul. "This song," I started to say, amazed. "It is the music of the spheres," explained one of the beings. "The sound of creation in constant motion." There was no rush on this journey. We moved at a peaceful pace, as if time no longer existed. I felt completely at peace, surrounded by that cosmic music. As we passed through the rings, I started having flashbacks of my life. But these were no ordinary memories. It was like I could relive every moment, feel every emotion again. I saw my childhood, my parents teaching me to ride a bike in a sunny park. I felt the wind on my face. I heard their encouraging voices. "You can do it, Aurora. Pedal." I saw the day I met Caleb in college. It was raining, and he offered to share his umbrella with me. Our eyes met, and in that instant, I knew my life had changed forever. I relived our marriage, the thrill of saying I do in front of our friends and family, the birth of our first daughter, Lily, the fear and joy of that moment. Each memory was like a soap bubble floating around me. I could touch them and immerse myself in them, reliving every detail. But it wasn't just happy moments. I also saw the times I hurt someone, when I was selfish or cruel. I saw arguments with Caleb, moments when I lost patience with my students, missed opportunities to help others. "Why am I seeing all this?" I asked my guides. "To understand," they replied. "To see your life through the eyes of divine love." And it was true. As I reviewed these moments, there was no judgment. It was more like a deep understanding of how every action, every choice, affected not just me, but everyone around me. As we progressed, I felt a subtle shift. The music became more intense, more vibrant. The light at the end of the tunnel was getting brighter and brighter. It was not a blinding glow, but one that attracted, that called. "What lies beyond?" I asked, a mix of excitement and apprehension in my voice. "Home," my guides replied. "The place where we all came from and where we will all return one day." Then, suddenly, we emerged from the tunnel. What I saw next is something that words can hardly describe, but I will try my best to share this extraordinary experience. Upon exiting the tunnel, I found myself in calling it a place might not be the right word. It was more like a state of being. Imagine a vast field but made entirely of light. There was no ground, no sky, just an infinite expanse of luminosity. "Where are we?" I asked my guides, marveling at the sight before me. One of them replied, "This is the spiritual plane, Aurora, the realm of souls. Some call it heaven, others nirvana, but names are human limitations. Here, these limitations do not exist." In this expanse of light, there were people. No, not exactly people as we know them. They were beings of light, each shining with a unique intensity. There were thousands of them, perhaps millions, forming a luminous crowd that stretched as far as the eye could see. The most incredible thing is that, upon seeing me, all these beings seemed to rejoice. It was as if they were welcoming me. I felt a wave of love so intense that I almost lost my balance. "Why is everyone so happy to see me?" I asked, confused. "Because every soul that returns is a cause for celebration," explained one of my guides. "Every experience on earth brings growth not only to the individual soul, but to all of creation." As I watched the crowd, I began to recognize some of these beings. I saw my grandparents, who had passed away years ago. My grandmother Sarah approached, her being radiating love. "Aurora, my dear," she said, her voice sounding like music. "It's good to see you here, even if it's just a visit." "Grandfather," I replied, excited, "I miss you so much. There are so many things I wanted to tell you." She smiled with infinite understanding. "I know, honey. I've been watching you. I'm so proud of the woman you've become." Before I could respond, I saw my grandfather Joe approach. Beside him was my old dog, Rex, jumping and wagging his tail as if he had never left. "Rex," I exclaimed, bending down to hug him. To my surprise, I could feel his soft fur and the warmth of his body. "How is this possible?" My grandfather laughed, a sound full of joy. "Here, darling, anything is possible. Love transcends all forms." I looked around and realized that I recognized many more beings than I initially thought. There were friends I had lost, teachers who inspired me, even people I had met briefly but who somehow left a mark on my life. "How can I meet them all?" I asked my guides. Connections go beyond the time and space you know on Earth," explained one of them. "Every encounter, every interaction, creates an eternal bond between souls." As I absorbed this information, I noticed something even more surprising. Some of the beings I recognized seemed different, more radiant, more complete somehow. Why do some seem so evolved? I asked. One of my guides responded, each soul evolves at its own pace. Aurora, some go through many earthly lives, others through few, but all are on a journey of growth and learning. This revelation made me think about my own life, about the choices I had made. What about me? How am I doing on this journey? My grandmother Sarah approached again. Honey, every life is precious and unique. You are exactly where you need to be on your journey. Don't compare yourself to others, just focus on growing and loving. At that moment, I felt a wave of understanding wash over me. I saw how everything in the universe is interconnected, how each action, each thought, affects the whole. The separation we feel from each other and from God is just an illusion. It's so overwhelming, I said, feeling small in the face of the vastness of this reality. One of my guides placed what I can only describe as a hand on my shoulder. It's normal to feel this way, Aurora. But remember, you are part of this whole. Your existence is as important as that of any other soul here. As I contemplated these revelations, I noticed that there was an area of the spiritual plane that seemed even brighter, more intense. What is that? I asked, pointing to the bright light. My guides exchanged glances. That, said one of them, is where the cherubs worship. It is a sacred space, closer to the divine presence. I felt an irresistible attraction to that place. Can we go there? I asked anxiously. My guides nodded. If you feel ready, we can get closer, one of them replied. And so, with a mixture of awe and anticipation, we begin to move toward that intense light, ready for the next stage of this extraordinary journey. As we got closer to that brighter area, I started to hear something. At first it was just a distant murmur, but it soon turned into a clearer, more defined sound. It was music, but not like any music I had ever heard on Earth. What is that sound? I asked, amazed. One of my guides replied, It's the song of the cherubs, Aurora, the eternal praise of the Creator. When we finally arrived, the sight I saw took my breath away, even though I wasn't actually breathing in that state. Before us was a group of beings unlike any others I had seen until then. They were smaller than other light beings, almost the size of human children, but the energy they emanated was incomparable. Each of them glowed with an intensity that made the other beings appear pale in comparison. The cherubs were in constant movement, dancing frantically and harmoniously at the same time. His arms moved with impressive speed, covering his eyes, ears, and mouth in repetitive sequences. Why do they move like that? I asked, fascinated. My guide explained, every movement has a profound meaning. When they cover their eyes, it is because the glory of God is so intense that not even they can contemplate it directly. By covering their ears, they indicate that the divine mysteries are so deep that even they can fully understand. And when they cover their mouths, they recognize that no words can adequately express the greatness of God. As I watched, I realized that the cherubs weren't just moving, they were singing. Their voices joined together in a celestial choir that echoed throughout the spiritual plane. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, they sang. The intensity was overwhelming. Every word seemed to carry the weight of eternity. Suddenly I felt something strange. It was as if every fiber of my being wanted to join in that adoration. Without realizing it, I found myself moving along with the cherubs, my voice joining the heavenly choir. What's happening to me? I asked, surprised by my own reaction. One of my guides smiled, or at least that was the feeling I got. You are experiencing the true nature of worship, Aurora. It is not something we do out of obligation or to please God. It is a natural, almost involuntary response to the divine presence, like breathing or the beating of the heart. As I participated in that cosmic dance, I began to understand things I had never imagined before. I saw how the entire universe, from the smallest particle to the largest galaxy, was in constant worship. Every atom, every star, every living being, everything was part of a great cosmic choir, praising the Creator simply for existing. It's beautiful, I whispered, moved. Yes, it is, agreed my guide. And the most incredible thing is that it never stops. Praise is eternal, always renewing itself, always fresh. I stayed there, I don't know for how long, immersed in this transcendental experience. Time seemed to have no meaning in that place. It could have been a minute or 1,000 years. It made no difference. Little by little, I felt it was time to continue my journey. There was more to see, more to experience. With a mixture of reluctance and expectation, I turned away from the circle of cherubs. "Where are we going now?" I asked my guides. They exchanged meaningful glances before responding. "I know, Aurora," one of them said in a solemn voice. "You are going to experience something that few have the privilege of experiencing on a visit like yours." "What is it?" I asked, curious and a little apprehensive. "You will get a glimpse of the divine presence," replied the guide. My entire being shook at that statement. I didn't know if I was ready for this, but something inside me yearned for this experience. And so, with my heart, or whatever my center was in that state, full of expectation, I prepared myself for the next step of my spiritual journey. As we moved away from the cherubs, I felt a change in the spiritual environment. The light, which was already intense, began to become even brighter. But it wasn't a glare that dazzled or hurt. It was a light that warmed, that welcomed. "What is happening?" I asked my guides, feeling a mixture of excitement and dread. One of them replied, "We are approaching the source of all existence, Aurora. Prepare yourself." Suddenly, I realized that I was in front of someone difficult to describe. It was a presence so vast, so absolute, that it seemed to fill all space and at the same time, be concentrated right there, in front of me. I understood, in a flash of understanding, that I was facing the very essence of God. It was not an anthropomorphic figure, a little old man with a white beard sitting on a throne. It was pure energy, pure love, pure consciousness. The intensity was almost unbearable. Imagine being in front of the sun, but a sun made not of fire, but of unconditional love. It was something like that, only infinitely more powerful. I don't know if I can take this," I whispered, feeling completely exposed and vulnerable. One of my guides placed what I can only describe as a hand on my shoulder. "Breathe, Aurora. Remember, you are part of this. This light is within you too." At that moment, all the ideas I had about God, all the doctrines I learned in church, seemed so small, so limited. I realized that our religions, however well-intentioned, barely scratch the surface of the true divine nature. Then I heard a voice. It was not a voice in the conventional sense. It was more like, well, imagine that every atom in the universe spoke at the same time, in perfect harmony. The voice said, "Aurora, my beloved daughter." These simple words filled me with indescribable joy. Tears, or whatever the equivalent was in that state, streamed down my face. "Father?" I replied hesitantly. The divine presence seemed to smile, although there was no face to smile. Yes, and no. Father, Mother, Creator, Source, all names and no names. I am what I am. In front of this presence, I felt completely exposed. There was nothing to hide, no secret thoughts, no flaws that could be hidden. And yet, there was no judgment, just total acceptance, unconditional love. "But, all the wrong things I've done?" I asked, remembering my mistakes and failures. The voice responded with infinite compassion. "There are no mistakes, only lessons. Every experience is an opportunity for growth, for expansion. You are perfect in your imperfection." I began to understand things I had never imagined before. I saw how everything in the universe is interconnected, how each action, each thought affects the whole. I realized that the separation we feel from each other, and from God, is just an illusion. Why can't we see this when we're on Earth? I asked. The veil of forgetfulness is necessary for free will, explained the divine presence. Without it, there would be no real choice, no real growth. I stood there, bathed in this divine light, absorbing truths that went beyond any human understanding. It was as if every question I had ever had was being answered, not with words, but with a deep understanding that penetrated every fiber of my being. After what felt like an eternity, and maybe it was, I felt it was time to leave. The divine presence spoke one last time. Remember, Aurora, you are never alone. I am always with you, within you. Go and share this love with the world. As I reluctantly walked away from this transcendental experience, I knew that my life would never be the same. I would forever carry this glimpse of divine truth in my heart. After the overwhelming experience with the divine presence, I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. I was wrong. My guides led me to what I can only describe as a heavenly court. It was not a court as we know it on earth, with a judge, jury, and lawyers. It was more like a space for review and reflection. In the center of that space, I saw a figure that I immediately recognized. It was Jesus. He wasn't exactly like the paintings portray him. His eyes were an intense gold, as if they contained all the love in the universe. His hair was white, bright as the dawn. When he smiled at me, I felt a wave of peace so deep I almost collapsed. "Dawn," Jesus said, his voice full of love. "Welcome." "Jesus?" I replied, my voice, or whatever it was in that state, shaking with emotion. "Is it really you?" He laughed, a sound that seemed to contain all the joy in the universe. "Yes, it's me, but not as you imagined me. I'm more, and at the same time, less." Before I could ask what he meant by that, Jesus gently led me into the center of this courtroom. It was then that something incredible happened. My entire life began to be projected before me and the spiritual beings present. It was like watching a movie in 3D, except I could feel every emotion, every thought. I saw moments of kindness and generosity that I had forgotten, moments when a kind word or a gesture of affection made all the difference in someone's life. "Do you remember this day?" Jesus asked, pointing to a scene in which I was comforting a student who had lost her father. "Yes," I replied, excited. "Little Sarah." I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged her. Jesus smiled. "Sometimes a hug says 1,000 words. Your act of compassion helped Sarah deal with her loss and influenced her decision to become a counselor when she grew up." I was surprised. I didn't know. "We rarely know the full impact of our actions," Jesus explained. "Every act of love creates waves that spread throughout the universe." But I also saw moments of selfishness, of anger, of pettiness. I saw the times I hurt people, even without meaning to. One scene in particular made me cringe, a heated argument with Caleb where I said things I immediately regretted. "I was so cruel," I murmured, feeling ashamed. Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder. "Aurora, the important thing is not that you made mistakes, but that you learned from them. See what happened next." The scene changed, showing Caleb and I talking calmly, apologizing to each other, our love stronger after reconciliation. "Every challenge is an opportunity for growth," Jesus said. "Don't judge yourself by your mistakes, but by your willingness to learn and improve." The most surprising thing is that there was no trial. Every scene was watched with understanding and love. It was as if the purpose was not to condemn me, but to make me understand the impact of each of my actions. Suddenly, a shadowy figure appeared. It was a being that emanated a deep darkness, despite having an almost attractive appearance. I recognized him as a representation of evil, perhaps what we call Satan. "Ah, Aurora," the being said in a seductive voice, but full of malice. "Let's talk about your sins, shall we? The envy you felt for your friend's success, the impure thoughts you had, the times you lied to get away with it." For a moment, I felt scared. His words seemed to echo my worst fears and insecurities. But then a heavenly voice asked, Is she covered in the blood of the Lamb? Jesus stepped forward, showing the marks of the crucifixion on his hands. I'm her lawyer, he said, his voice full of love and authority. The evil being let out a cry of frustration. That's not fair. She sinned. She deserves punishment. Justice was satisfied on the cross. Jesus replied calmly, the price has been paid. Aurora chose love, chose forgiveness. She is forgiven. With those words, the evil being disappeared like dust in the wind. I felt immense relief, deep gratitude for the love and grace I was receiving. Jesus turned to me, his eyes full of compassion. Aurora, you have seen your life through the eyes of divine love. What have you learned? I reflected for a moment before responding. I learned that every action, every word, has a greater impact than we imagine. I learned that love is the most powerful force in the universe. And I learned that despite my mistakes, I am loved unconditionally. Jesus smiled. Exactly. Take this understanding back to the world. Live with love, forgive yourself and others, and always remember, you are infinitely loved. I was moved, wanting to stay there forever, bathed in this unconditional love. But something told me that my journey wasn't over yet. While I was still absorbing everything I had experienced in the spiritual court, I heard a voice. It was not the voice of Jesus, nor of the beings of light who guided me. It was a different voice, full of authority, but also compassion. Aurora Fairchild, the voice said, resounding through spiritual space. Yes, I replied, a little apprehensive. Your name is not on the list of those leaving today. At first, I didn't understand what this meant. I looked at Jesus, confused. He smiled gently and explained, Aurora, you have a choice to make. Your time on earth was not destined to end today. You can choose to return to your physical body, or you can choose to stay here. The realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. I would have to go back, return to my body, to my life on earth. I confess that my first instinct was to protest. But how can I leave all this? I asked, feeling anguish rising inside me. This peace, this love, how can I return to the pain and limitations of the physical world? Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder. I understand your dilemma, Aurora, but remember, you have an unfinished mission on earth. Then, gently, I was reminded of my family. I saw images of my husband, Caleb, devastated by the possibility of losing me. Caleb, I murmured, feeling a pang of guilt for almost forgetting about him. He needs you, Jesus said softly. And not just him. I saw my oldest daughter, Lily, still too young to understand what was happening. Her eyes were full of tears, confused by all the commotion in the hospital. Lily, my little one. Tears began to form in my spiritual eyes. And then I saw my newborn baby Thomas struggling in the NICU, so small, so fragile, but with incredible willpower. Thomas, I whispered, feeling an overwhelming love for that little being I had barely met. Jesus spoke again. They need you, Aurora, not just to care for them, but to share what you have learned here, to show them the unconditional love you have experienced. I understood that my mission on earth was not yet complete. There were people who needed me, lessons I still needed to learn and teach. But what if I forget all this when I get back? I asked, fearfully. What if I can't carry this love with me? Jesus smiled. You won't forget it completely. The essence of this experience will be engraved in your soul, and whenever you need it, you can access that love within you. He continued, furthermore, if you choose to return, you will take a piece of this place with you. Your life will never be the same. You will have the opportunity to be a beacon of light for others, to share divine love in the physical world. At that moment, I felt a mixture of emotions. There was sadness at leaving that place of perfect peace, but also a renewed determination. I would return, not just for my family, but because I now had a new purpose. I took a deep breath, or the spiritual equivalent thereof, and said, "I will be back." Jesus smiled and touched my forehead. "Remember, Aurora," he said, "love is the most powerful force in the universe. Live in it and through it, and never forget, you are never alone." And just like that, before I could say anything else, I felt a force pulling me back. The spiritual world began to dissolve around me. The last thing I saw was Jesus' loving smile, and then darkness. For a moment, everything was black and silent. It was as if I were floating in an absolute void. Then, little by little, I began to hear distant sounds, machine beeps, muffled voices, the sound of hurried footsteps. Slowly, very slowly, I opened my eyes. The light was intense, almost painful after the softness of the spiritual plane. I blinked several times, trying to focus. The first thing I felt was pain, an intense physical pain that seemed to envelop every inch of my body. After having experienced the peace and lightness of the spiritual plane, the feeling of being back in the physical body was overwhelming. "Dr. Martinez," I heard someone scream. "She's waking up." I saw faces above me, expressions of relief and amazement. Dr. Martinez, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, leaned over me. "Mrs. Fairchild? Aurora, can you hear me?" I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and sore. Only a moan came out. "Don't try to talk yet," Dr. Martinez said softly. "You've been through a lot. It's a miracle you're back with us." A nurse kindly offered me some water with a spoon. The cool liquid was a relief to my parched throat. Little by little, I got my bearings. I was back in the delivery room, although now it looked more like an intensive care unit. There were machines everywhere, monitors blinking and beeping. "See, Caleb?" I managed to mutter. Dr. Martinez smiled. "Your husband is here. He hasn't left your side for a minute. I'll call him right now." Moments later, Caleb ran into the room. His eyes were red and swollen, with deep circles under his eyes. It looked like he hadn't slept in days. But when he saw me, his face lit up with a smile that could light up the entire world. "Aurora!" he exclaimed, rushing to my side and holding my hand. Tears streamed down his face. "Oh God, I thought I lost you." I squeezed his hand back as hard as I could. I'm back," I whispered. Caleb kissed my forehead, his tears falling down my face. "Yes, you're back. And I thank God for that every second." Suddenly I remembered. "The baby. How is our son?" Caleb smiled through his tears. "He's a fighter, just like his mother. He's in the NICU, but he's getting better every day. The doctors are optimistic." I felt an immense relief wash over me. My baby was alive. I was alive. We had a chance. Over the next few days, as I recovered in the hospital, the reality of my experience set in. On the one hand, I was happy to be back, to be able to see my family, to hold my baby. On the other hand, I felt a deep longing for that place of light and love that I had experienced. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I would wake up crying, longing to return to that divine presence. Earthly life, with all its complications and challenges, seemed so heavy in comparison. One night, as I held Thomas in my arms in the NICU, I whispered to him, "Mommy saw heaven, you know, and I came back for you and your sister and your dad. You are my little piece of heaven here on earth." The night nurse, a kind lady named Rosa, listened to me. She approached with a knowing smile. "You know, Mrs. Fairchild," she said softly, "I've heard many stories of patients who have had experiences like yours. They always come back changed." I looked at her, surprised. Do you believe me?" Rose shrugged. "Who am I to doubt? I have seen too much in this hospital not to believe that there is more between heaven and earth than our vain philosophy dreams of." Your words brought me comfort. Maybe I wasn't alone in this experience. Maybe there were others who would understand. Little by little, I began to understand that my mission now was to bring some of that light into this world. I couldn't just regret what I had left behind. I had to use what I learned to make a difference here and now. I began to see beauty in things that previously went unnoticed. A sunset, a child's smile, a bird's song. Everything seemed loaded with meaning, with a divine presence that I could now recognize. I knew my journey was just beginning. I had a lot to process, a lot to understand, but I knew one thing for sure. Nothing would be the same as before, and I was ready for this new life, this second chance I was given. In the months and years since my near-death experience, I realized that my life had changed profoundly. It was not an instantaneous transformation, but a gradual process of rediscovery and redefinition of purpose. The first big change was in the way I saw life and death. The fear of death, which had previously haunted me occasionally, had completely disappeared. I knew, with a certainty that went beyond faith, that death was not the end, but just a transition. This new perspective profoundly affected my daily life. I remember a conversation I had with Caleb about 6 months after my experience. We were sitting in the backyard of our house, watching Lily play while Thomas slept in the crib next to us. The sunset painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, a sight that now seemed almost sacred to me. "Aurora," Caleb said, his voice wavering, "you've changed so much since, well, you know. Sometimes I wonder if what, love?" I asked, turning to him. He sighed. "If you're still the same person I married, if you still love me the same way." I was surprised by his confession. I took his hand and squeezed it gently. "Oh, Caleb," I replied, "I love you more than ever. What I've seen, what I've experienced, has made me understand love in a much deeper way. It's not that I've fundamentally changed. It's more like if I had awakened to a greater reality." Caleb frowned, trying to understand. "Like this?" I thought for a moment, searching for the right words. "It's as if before I saw the world in black and white, and now I see it in vibrant colors. The love I feel for you, for our children, for all people, is more intense, deeper. I understand now that we are all connected, all part of something bigger." Caleb was silent for a while, absorbing my words. Then, with tears in his eyes, he said, "I don't completely understand, Aurora, but I'm glad you came back to us. And if this experience made you love us even more, well, I can only be grateful for that." I hugged him tight, feeling a rush of gratitude for having him in my life. This conversation was just one of the many transformations I experienced. My relationship with spirituality has also changed drastically. I continued attending church, but my faith now went far beyond doctrines and rituals. I had experienced something that transcended any specific religion. One Sunday, after church, Pastor Jim called me to talk. "Aurora," he said, "I've noticed a change in you. There's a light in your eyes that wasn't there before. Would you like to share what happened?" I hesitated for a moment, fearing that my experience might be misinterpreted, but something told me to trust. "Pastor," I began, "I had a near-death experience, and what I saw, what I felt, changed everything." To my surprise, Pastor Jim didn't seem shocked or skeptical. He just nodded, a gentle smile on his face. "You know, Aurora," he said, "over the years I have heard many similar stories, and each one of them reminds me that God's love is far greater than any doctrine or religion can encompass. Your words brought me immense relief. So, do you believe me?" "I believe you had a profound and transformative experience," he responded, "and I believe God works in mysterious ways. What's important is how you choose to live your life from that experience." This conversation gave me the courage to start sharing my story with others, not to convince anyone, but to offer hope and a different perspective on life and death. Professionally, I felt the need to do more. I continued as a teacher, but I started to get involved in community projects, especially those aimed at people in vulnerable situations. I started a support group for parents who have lost children, using my own experience of almost losing Thomas to offer comfort and hope. At one of these meetings, I met Maria, a mother who had lost her daughter in a car accident. "How do you do it?" Maria asked me one day, tears streaming down her face. "How can you have hope after looking death in the face?" I held his hands in mine. "Maria, what I've learned is that death is not the end. It's a transition. Your daughter still exists, still loves you, just in a different form now, and one day you will meet again." I saw a glimmer of hope in Maria's eyes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Of course, not everything was easy. There were moments of doubt, of questioning. At times, the intensity of the experience I had seemed to lessen, and I found myself wondering if it had all been real. But then, in moments of stillness, I would feel that loving presence again, and my certainty would be renewed. My children grew up with this new version of me. Thomas, who was born on that fateful day, grew up strong and healthy. Years later, to my surprise and joy, he decided to become a minister. "Mom," he told me when he announced his decision, "your stories about God's love, about how everything is connected, it shaped who I am. I want to share that message with the world." Lily, my oldest daughter, although more reserved about spiritual matters, developed extraordinary compassion and empathy. She became a volunteer in social projects at a young age, always looking for ways to help others. "You taught me that every act of kindness matters, Mom," she told me once. "That love is the most powerful force in the universe. I want to live up to that." Looking back, I see that near-death experience was a turning point in my life. It was as if I had died and been reborn, not just physically, but spiritually. Today, at age 55, I feel like I'm still unfolding the lessons from that experience. Every day is an opportunity to live with more love, more awareness, more purpose. I know that the path is not always easy, that there are challenges and moments of doubt, but I also know, deep down in my being, that we are all part of something bigger, something beautiful and loving that awaits us beyond this life. And so, I move forward, grateful for every moment, every breath, every opportunity to love and serve. Because in the end, this is what I learned. Love is the most powerful force in the universe, and it is through love that we find our true purpose, our true connection with the divine. My near-death experience was not the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new journey, a journey of love, compassion, and deeper understanding. And as long as I live, I will continue to share this message, that death is not something to be feared, that love transcends all barriers, and that each of us has a divine purpose in this vast universe.